All right, guys. Welcome back to the Fitness in Philosophy podcast. My name is Robbie Gustin, and I am joined by OPEX Fitness founder James FitzGerald. James, tell us about your favorite type of music.
Hey, I'd love to be able to say that's almost as unfair as the book question, which I think you asked, but it's not. Although I'm pretty eclectic in my music choice. I think if I was to like get uh, knocked off this planet by a car, um, and they found my phone and looking for evidence, and they're like, let's just search through his music history to kind of come up with like what he's in. I think people would be like, wow, it's quite broad. I had John Coltrane on the other night preparing supper. I listened to Dead Mouse this morning, and then Canadian indie rock, kind of mishmash. I listened to some Dead Mouse during my ski erg kettlebell swing stuff, and then some Canadian indie rock during some resistance training. Um, my dad had a number of vinyls in the late 70s and 80s that were my first introduction to music, which kind of gives you an idea, where, how it set the tone, which was Led Zeppelin, um, Glenn Campbell, um, the Beatles. So, country, classic rock, and pop. It's like, so it's a nice blend of all of them. So yeah, maybe an episode to itself where you and I could both just jam on music selection, rhythm, and something. I think that would be interesting. I'm not sure how we'd fit it into a fitness inside of philosophy, but maybe we can jam on it because I like it. I like discussing my various experiences with music, and I think it brings people together to talk about their enjoyment of music, and you know,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
There's that Oliver Sacks book. I want to say Musicophilia or what I forget the name of it, but it's like the brain science behind music. And then there's a branch of philosophy called aesthetics, which is concerned with like beauty and art, but it also there's a whole huge music component in there. So
Oh,
yeah,
there we go. There's our in. That's all we needed was to find
right.
a language that would fit us into that. So yeah, I'm all up for that because yeah, there's lots of good stuff in there. Yeah, and we could probably tie in a little conversation on expression, art and expression, and
Oh yeah.
physical expression and where that fits in, and yeah.
And what type of music ties with like sustainable map 10 versus
Oh,
like
oh, we're going there. We're
yeah,
going there. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Yeah, we know we're going there. As an example, too, just because you asked up front, Sean McCullough, who's a OPEX gym owner and a colleague and coach and friend, sent over just an interesting song that he was listening to. Is this? I think it was an Icelandic musician, and I think it's Jonesy, Jonsi, and of course the S I think has the I is a little different in language. But there was a song on there. I think it's "Grow Till Tall." That's the name of the song. Anyways, he sent it over and then like captured it with like it's almost like giving someone a wine selection with meals. It's like this song would go best with this, you know? And there's so much beauty in that, right? Like there's a song selection which has this like this ambiance and feeling around it. And he was like spot on. He was like, late day walk, sun setting, kind of song. And like you listen to it, it's like, man, that's like money, like right on the nose. Um, so I'm all across the board with regards to music, and I have to say that um, I do find myself in a really positive, aware state, like a very content, satisfied feeling when I'm listening to music, like a really deeply like shit is good. This is what happiness is, when I'm listening to music. So think there's something good in there.
Agreed. Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I mean, art, I've always like visual art. I've always been, there's some I enjoy here and there, but mostly more confounded by than anything else. But music has always been something that just, yeah, speaks to me in like all different sorts of varieties. And
yeah, good stuff. Great question. And not to ask you to be brief on it, but I got one back for you. Your favorite live concert?
Ooh, I have a couple. But I probably the main one. I saw Jay-Z at Madison Square Garden while in college, and it was like the year after Fade to Black, like his retirement album. And yeah, I mean, no one actually thought he was going to be like really, really retired, but like that retirement idea led to easily one of my favorite albums like ever. And that was pretty awesome.
I bet. Cool. I bet.
So that was, yeah.
Yeah, man, I can imagine that. Good talent live?
Oh yeah. I mean, just amazing. Like they made a separate one of his appearances at Madison Square Garden, like into a concert movie, which was excellent. But even the one that I went to see, which wasn't the movie, was still like, yeah, I mean, he's just a performer at heart, just like,
great.
So yeah, it was really good.
Super.
As an aside, just out of curiosity, do you have Spotify? Do you use Spotify at all?
Yeah.
So like I'm gigantic Apple junkie, but and a privacy junkie. Prefer not to let the Borg know like everything about me. But I will say this: as far as music, probably one of the biggest things that's like probably the only reason I use Spotify as opposed to something else is like they have that Discover Weekly, like where it's like 30 songs, and like every single week there's something on there that like blows my mind.
Yeah.
Brought to you by Spotify.
Yeah. Great. What a very intelligent way of, I think, circumventing that whole privacy thing, my belief anyways, which I'm sure everyone is aware of that, is in 5 years, there'll be another book written like one of those over there by an engineer inside of these music companies that are showing there's logarithms based upon people's actions and behaviors and music selection. Guaranteed. And that's going to lead, of course, to consumer capabilities, and everyone's going to want that data, so it's good. I'm glad they're figuring out what your choices are. They'll be setting you up for sales in 5 years time.
And pretty much
buy.
In pretty much every other way, like search engine, browser, like everything else, like, and I very much believe in kind of the line on privacy, but man, just get no money from Spotify, but like that has been one of because just for a very long time, it was hard to discover music that I really like. And I'm surrendering a little bit to the Borg to get my 5-star songs, I guess.
I just, I love the way you phrase that. Seeing we're on that area, we may as well keep going for a second here on Coleman Hughes is a young intellect that I listen to, and he put me on to Ground News, which is a website as well as an app that has a really interesting way of going about making you aware of what you're biased to and what you're getting for news. And it lays out through logarithms where this sits on the blue-red continuum, and also shows you who this would be best for and who's going to listen to this. And then it gives you, like, if there's a story, for example, what was the one this morning? Biden receiving live vaccination or something. There was like, and I said, I think it was Pence, maybe it was Biden, but there was like 8 stories underneath it, and they all get ranked categorically based upon who put it out, what the language is good. So it allows you basically to figure out the most interesting thing, Robbie, is your blind spots. So it figures out over time your blind spots in what you are or not consuming in regards to your information. So anyways, a shout out to ground news and their attempts at trying to get around that whole area of a true open source concept of news. So
that's really cool.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
we've got 2 new sponsors. They don't know they're sponsors, but yeah, they're sponsors now. So.
Yep, that's how we roll. We just have sponsors, and they don't know they're sponsors, but I mean, it doesn't matter.
It'll be interesting to see at one point if ground news, like if they start to evaluate other things besides news, and how they would evaluate our podcast. Like what?
Yes.
What spectrum of?
You're like,
what? Wait. It went this way, and then wait, what?
There's a gray, but there's a gray zone too. Like there's blue on the left, right? Gray in the middle, and then red. And it kind of like goes right to left relative to the story. So ours would probably break the screen, it'd be like,
Tyranny.
They probably would cancel us because they're like, you can't be all over the place. You can't ask questions here and ask questions here.
Can't be both in favor of fitness tyranny and fitness liberty. Like, which direction is it going?
The machine is just smoking,
We broke the algorithm.
We broke ground news.
Oh man, that's funny.
Yeah. On to belief.
Belief, yes.
In fitness.
And fitness.
Yeah, because we can't put period after belief. We could be here all week.
Correct. Yes. I mean, so many of our episodes could be potential 2-parters, and we'll see how this one goes. But man, this is there's a lot in here. There's a lot of good stuff in here.
Yeah.
So just to situate it for people, if this is your first one listening, welcome. But if you've been listening to the past few, we did a couple episodes on dogmatism and its relationship with fitness, and then we did one on skepticism, and now we're turning to belief. So just to situate that, we've been saying the past few episodes just as a way of giving people context that, again, Aristotle talks about virtue sitting as a mean in between 2 vices. And when we talk about belief, we could say that dogmatism is a vice of excess and skepticism is a vice of deficiency, in the sense that skepticism, you would hold off from believing things that you should believe. You don't have enough belief in even things you should. And dogmatism is too much belief in things perhaps you shouldn't. And proper belief would be the virtue in between those 2 vices. And we'll talk more about that. One thing just to mention that I'm not sure I mentioned in the Aristotle or the virtue episode, but I think is worth bearing in mind. One of the cool things about this metaphor, the seesaw metaphor, or virtue being a mean between 2 extremes, is the idea that this is one of the reasons why it's so hard to do the right thing, or like to stay on track, is that there's so many different ways to go wrong, both in the excess and the deficiency direction. Yeah. And like the right is always a balance between the 2. So
that's why I always add that language of when I get into conversation around meaning to life. Whoa. Grew up poor in the midst of dysfunctional culture. A YouTube video on J.D. Vance and Hillbilly Elegy just came up. Interesting. I always add your language there of adjustments to this all these right, all these wrongs, and where they sit. And that's what I think about anyways. There's always these adjustments that you have to make relative to each scenario and each context and each thing that comes in front of you. And I think that's what we're trying to do anyways, is to arm people with this, like, see this across the board in multiple different ways.
Yeah, because I mean, I think, if one were looking for an explanation of like, why is life challenging and why is it easier to do the wrong thing rather than the right thing? Like what facts could we use to explain that? Well, one would be there are many different ways to go wrong, and it's hard to get that balance between the 2. And so much of life is that balance between those 2 extremes.
Yeah.
So just as we've done with other things, I wanted to start off with a plain English definition of belief and then talk more about a philosophical definition. So a belief is a state or habit of mind in which trust or confidence is placed in some person or thing. You could believe in a person, believe in a thing, something that is accepted, considered to be true, or held as an opinion. And then lastly, conviction of the truth of some statement or the reality of some being or phenomenon, especially one based on examination of evidence. This could be belief in germs, belief in God, belief in the quantum realm, all those things at one point or another were like, are germs the vector of disease? We're not sure. Or is space malleable, in response to massive objects? Like, it eventually came to be known through, sufficient evidence, but it's something that was initially believed without sufficient justification. And then the philosophical definition: belief is a propositional attitude. So that sounds maybe weird at first, or people don't know what to make of that, but it's a little bit easier to understand when you break it down. So what's a proposition? It's just a statement with a particular meaning. So take two different statements. Dogs have fur, and los perros tienen pelaje, which is just the Spanish version of dogs have fur. Those two sentences in different languages have the same meaning. So that's a proposition. An attitude towards that proposition would be, well, do I have confidence in that? Would I place a bet on that? Would I affirm that? Or would I deny that? And a lot of the talk around belief in philosophy that we'll get to, is that degrees admit of, beliefs admit of degrees. You can have more or less confidence in something. There's some things you might be willing to bet, every dollar you have in savings in your home and all the rest of that stuff, because you're so sure it's true. Yeah. And then there's other things, aliens existing, maybe you're willing to bet $10. So you can believe those things, but to greater or lesser extents.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I like that. I think about when I read that propositional attitude, first thing came to mind was that's definitely a philosopher's way of defining something. and then secondly, it is a higher order definition, because it takes into consideration the experience of the eyes and the eyes of the beholder as to how they see things. And then, i.e., what bets do you want to place on things? How you see the continua that's there in front of you for what you wish to figure out, which I want to get to as a segue over time to the issue that we're going to deal with in fitness with a lack of experience. And then how do we get to this form of belief without a lot of experience?
Right.
So.
Absolutely. Philosophers, if nothing else, are good at making distinctions. Sometimes that can be a good thing, and sometimes it can be a little bit much. But yeah, the propositional attitude, there's a reason for it, but I agree with you. It makes something that seems straightforward a little bit more complicated than it might otherwise seem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how do beliefs compare and contrast with different epistemological concepts? And just a refresher on epistemological, just means of or relating to belief, knowledge, justification, just like how we get along cognitively with the world. So take something like truth. A belief can be true or false. So truth, is going to be a feature of belief depending on whether the belief corresponds with the world or not. Justification: a belief can be justified or unjustified depending on the objective evidence marshaled in its favor. So just like truth, justification is a addition to belief. It's a add-on that levels it up. It's a superpower. It's like a Mario mushroom. It's like, okay, we got this belief here, and now we got justification. Like, it's a stronger belief.
Yeah.
Knowledge is built on beliefs. Beliefs are necessary for knowledge. You couldn't have knowledge without a belief, but it's not sufficient because you need both truth and justification additionally to make knowledge. And then two that are related, but I think maybe just worth distinguishing, would be an opinion or a guess. And there are different ways we use these colloquially. Opinion or a guess, it's somewhat related, but it's more of a flyer. It's more of a, I think this, I guess. A belief is something typically someone has a bit more affirmatory oomph behind it. You know what I mean? Like, it's something you would bet on or assent to. Again, they're related, but a belief is much more a wager that the proposition is true or false. And then faith is obviously related to belief, but faith usually is defined in one way or another as a belief, come what may.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the ways that can run into folly and not be a good thing. But I did think one thing that would be interesting to discuss today, and we'll get to it later on, is, is belief in something that goes beyond the evidence or even is potentially contrary to the evidence, perhaps in the fitness realm with the way things are practiced today and what we believe we would want it to be in the future, can that be a good thing, right?
Right.
We don't want to throw out all beliefs that go beyond the evidence or are, there's a difference between contrary to some evidence and contrary to all evidence, right?
Yes.
So like, are there beliefs that can extend beyond evidence and still be useful?
Yeah. I thought about, how you would help me classify wisdom on that continuum beyond knowledge that gets people to, could we say that it's really wisdom that should probably be the base support for claims of belief, and not only knowledge plus justification and truth. I was just thinking, and in terms of languaging it, that the wise person may be able to create some small language in which can become very believable, whereas someone who has knowledge, I still think that's a work in progress for the base support that they have to lay claim to something that people can believe in, if that makes sense. That's what I thought about anyways. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that. But.
No, that's a great one. I'm glad you mentioned that. I should have put that in there. I mean, the way it's traditionally thought of knowledge versus wisdom is, wisdom is the battle hardened, practical experience out in the world, whereas knowledge you could glean from a book.
Yes.
So, going back to Aristotle, he has this concept of phronesis, practical wisdom, which is basically the virtuous person is able to apply the virtues in the correct way only after a life well lived. Like you can't have a kid who's virtuous just yet.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to that where in terms of the continuum of belief, wisdom would be maybe a set of beliefs that start out in a certain way and just get chiseled and carved out through experience and come to be either discarded, some beliefs, or that much more hardened through experience.
Yeah, that's how I thought about it. In like, the wise person just says like 5 words, right? But that's a culmination of 10 million attempts at words, right? Of the books and experiences and etc. But they get to these 5 words that when you listen to it, it's like, I believe that.
Right.
And where does that come from though? Like, what's the base support, for wisdom that can get us to those points of belief? Just for us to think about as well, for individuals looking to try to find a pathway towards what they should believe, right? We just indirectly talked about one of the roads, I think, which is gaining knowledge, gaining experience, and then having this feedback loop over time to see how close you're bringing you to that one statement with 5 words.
Yeah, and I think one of the ideas there that's interesting to ask is, there are child prodigies of math, there are child prodigies of music. We've been talking about the Queen's Gambit. There's child prodigies of chess. There's Doogie Howser and things like that. But are there certain things that don't admit of you being a child prodigy? Like just having the knowledge, just having the book knowledge. Like, is virtue one of those things? Is fitness one of those things where you could read all the books you want and have the knowledge but not the knowledge how, not have the wisdom.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah. I was going to get there with the Santa Claus analogy for all of our adult listeners. Maybe we choose to go with dog fur instead, but that we'll get there, because I want to lean that into fitness knowledge and fitness wisdom as the exemplars of shared information you know, who we are, whether we like it or not. And so what does the fitness consumer, what should they believe? And where should that information come from? And what should be the characteristics and the life experience of the people that are sharing those truths? You know, so that's right. I'm glad you brought up the prodigy idea, because we're going to lean up against some uncomfortable areas of coaches being young in life and lived experiences that knowledge can't give them a great base support to help people believe in something. It essentially they have to get to a wise person area before they can say something like I do. But it's only because of my experience that it's, you know, but it's the same message as the 21-year-old was saying, just that I'm 47. So I was like, oh, well, geez, you know, old wise one with no hair. You must, that must be true. So I'll believe it. Yeah. If I may, before you continue too, just because I have, I think we may get lost on it. Will you decipher what the word proper means in the middle zone of proper belief?
Sure.
Okay. You know why I'm asking that, right? You're smirking, so I think you know why I'm asking that.
Well, maybe I'm in this particular time I'm smirking because philosophers will very often put hand wavy terms in there to like distinguish something that needs to be like figured out. So really, at least in English, in other languages, there may be a single word for this, but I couldn't think in English what a single word would be, whereas we have dogmatism on one end and skepticism on the other. Proper here is really just meant to signal that if we're talking about a virtue, we're saying that one would believe things that there is sufficient evidence for, and one would refrain from believing things that there is insufficient evidence for.
Okay.
But again, that it's kind of hand wavy, like do no harm, because of course, what's harm? What's proper? So that's what I was smirking at. It's meant to give people an idea of what we'd be striving for. But again, the tough question becomes what we would believe there or not.
But it doesn't impose an intentional bias towards one thing or the other, or that there should be a certain kind of belief. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And I mean, it gets fuzzy around the margins, of course, but I mean, we could obviously rattle off a couple, you know, right here. It's
don't kill someone.
Right, don't kill someone. And I'm standing on the earth right now. Do you know what I mean? Just things like that. And then as we get closer to different things, it might get more gray, but those would be examples.
Yeah.
And then we were going to talk about some unique features of beliefs. But James, I wanted to just ask, were there any of these, you know, like I said, we could kind of jam and freestyle here. Were there any of these particular topics or features that you wanted to start with or interested you more than others? Or do you want me to just head through and we'll kind of jam as we go? Or what do you prefer?
Let's head through and jam as we go. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So for these first couple things, these are just further features of beliefs that I want to mention. And then we're going to get very shortly into some fitness connections. So like I mentioned before, beliefs are something that admit of degrees of greater or lesser extents. It's not binary. It's not 0 or 1. Knowledge, I'm sure some philosopher is going to have a counter argument to me and say, well, there are degrees of knowledge. Yeah, okay. But generally speaking, knowledge tends to be less degree-based than belief. Belief is much more a matter of degrees, and we can have more or less confidence in something. So it's not binary the same way knowledge seems to be, where it's either knowledge of or don't have knowledge of. Mm-hmm. Another really interesting idea that goes back to one of our previous conversations is this notion of doxastic volunteerism, which again, another philosophical term, but really all it is asking, can we choose what we believe? And the same way we asked in a previous episode, can we choose what we desire or we want? This leads to some really interesting philosophical implications. Like, I can't choose to believe right now voluntarily this instant that the moon is made of cheese. Can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, we can't voluntarily choose to change our beliefs, which then leads to the question, how responsible are we for our beliefs? To what extent should we be praised or blamed? But it's also not true that beliefs just don't change at all, right? They're amenable to some things. So then the question in the middle there is like, what sorts of things change beliefs? Is it experiences? Is it other people you interact with? Clearly, part of that is evidence, but it's usually not just evidence. It's, one's experience with the evidence and things like that. So just a little nugget there for people to think about, like, to what extent can you really change your beliefs? And what are the implications of that?
Yeah. Yeah. I would ask folks to read Kahneman's work, Thinking Fast and Slow, and understanding also probably at a more, social science, neurocognitive, behavioral level around these deep underpinnings of how we make decisions and where they come from, and how we're conditioned when we have these things in place and we put them into different areas that we can call upon for making decisions. And I think that may color your points just made on how do we get to this, where do those embedded pieces come from that lead to our beliefs, and how we get to that. I think that area right there is extremely interesting to me personally, anyways, because it personally goes up against some of the things that I've been mulling over for a decade, and I will continue to do around free will and choices and where those things come from, and seeing just because it was just came up on my computer, the hillbilly elegy background around this embedded culture of poverty for generations, and how you can look at that from the outside since like the late 1700s and go, that kid who landed in Jackson, Kentucky, I think, who was J.D. Vance, he didn't choose his parents, and he has all these, so you can imagine that one human, how based upon their environment and everything that's around them, what choices did they have in how they see things and how they come to believe in things, right? And this is the greatest thing around the book and now the film, is that it takes you through the big struggle in his head as to how he came to believe these things, about himself and about his family and about drug dependency and addictions. And, it's fascinating. So anyways, I just wanted to make mention of that to say that I find it extremely interesting, that particular area of what we would call the base support environment and where that comes from for belief, what it leads to.
No, I think that's a great point. And I mean, belief is the fundamental epistemological unit with which we engage in the world. And so much of that comes from like before we turn 7. Do you know what I mean? Like all these embedded things, depending on where we grew up and what our parents believed. And obviously beliefs can come to change as they do in our lives, but beliefs are so profoundly important in how we go about anything. And we only have a very limited amount of control over how they can change and when they can change and like at what age they can change and what is necessary. It's not, as we'll talk about, like, it's not just enough to say like, here's the evidence, change your beliefs. Like if it were, like, the world would be a lot nicer and easier, but it's not. So it really is a profoundly important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And of course I like the tone you just added there, which we'll get to, of the age and age determining experience, and age, because one of the questions I want to get to is based upon that, and what we'll call cognitive repertoire potential or cognitive potential for people. One would argue as a biologist that you probably need to get to this highest level of cognitive potential before one could actually start making claims around possible beliefs. That's what I would state based upon just biology alone, right? It's like, well, you don't actually have the pieces to lift 1,000 pounds at age 5. So why don't you wait till 25 and then attempt it? It's the same kind of idea, is that there's these biological constraints of a lack of system support for you to actually have those really hard decisions, right? I tie in the Santa Claus analogy there for the 8-year-old versus the 18-year-old and explaining belief to both of them, right? So anyways, I look forward to that. But I think this lengthy, me jumping in here to discuss it, I'm saying it all for my own self-interest too, because it's of real interest to me, that particular area, where those things come from. And should I add to it, as a statement for today, I think conversation around that particular thing would certainly ease all this tension around diversity and diversity of thought and diversity of belief. I think if we were to accept, this concept that, at a certain age, you should have all these beliefs, and we should be empathetic to people that have lived this entire life of this existence in this environment. It should make sense that they believe what they believe, but we don't want to have conversation on that, so I think today that would be a really important one. Maybe us discussing in here today can be helpful for some too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use the term, we've used the term higher order many, many times in discussing things. And one thing you have to think about in the age equation as it relates to belief is it's one thing cognitively. Think about all the beings that don't have belief, right? It's like an amazing cognitive achievement for us to have beliefs in general. And so like just cognitively, as you come out as a kid, you can start, eventually to begin to have beliefs, but then it's a higher order thing, quite literally, to be able to have beliefs about beliefs, to view a belief from a third person perspective, say, do I accept it? Do I reject it? And so much of our engagement with the world initially is none of that reflection, none of it. It's just the beliefs come in, kind of do them. And then, when we get to be teenagers and want to rebel, then it's the higher order, like, I reflect, I have beliefs about my beliefs.
Yeah. And your feedback system is really refined and efficient.
Right.
That's the thing, that's higher order, i.e., you're 5 and you're like, wow, that car is there, but that car is moving fast, right? At age 12, you're like, that car will kill me. So at age 5, you're like, I believe that's a car. At age 12, you're like, I believe that car will kill me if I step in front of it. Those are, but if we were to pull out on a Westworld screen what that 5-year-old was thinking and put it into language, it'd be like car, Right. But it's the same fast moving car, but yeah, anyways, appreciate the time on that.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess connected with this, and the first one with kind of our fitness connection here, is that beliefs are highly tied to the social realm and interpersonal interaction. Now let's go back to our descriptive normative distinction. I'm saying what I just said as a descriptive claim. I'm saying what I just said as like a fact about how the world actually works. One might argue normatively the world should not work that way, but we know as a matter of fact that is how the world does in fact work. So trust, confidence, and interpersonal relationships are crucially important, again, as a descriptive fact to what we believe. And, there's the famous one that we've all run across. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. The idea that you believe in them and they believe in you. And of course, the fitness connection here, or at least one fitness connection, there could be many others. Clients relating to clients, clients relating to the collective, but obviously the coach-client relationship, right? You could know every single book fact possible on fitness or nutrition, but if you can't connect with your client or show them that you care or show them how this fits into their life and their values and things like that, something is deeply missed. So yeah, I guess we can jam on that. And I'm sure many thoughts there.
Yeah, just a few. Let's stretch that one out, shall we? It's good. Our relationship is building enough where it's just like a twinkle in the eye and a little smirk that can tell like the whole thing now as to what's happening. Softballs just being thrown back and forth. I appreciate it, Robbie. Yeah, I don't want to be lengthy on that, but I still would just want to make mention of the current surrounding in fitness of attention seeking and this lack of reality inside of people's perspective of fitness. Call it what you want, social media or the medium, has really created this really weird idea of what is real. So you said the words trust, confidence, and interpersonal relationships. Like, if that's what it takes for people to get to some level of belief as to what is real in fitness, man, the base support of social media and the internet is not the place to play in order to in order to create beliefs. So one of my finishing questions that I want everyone to come away with here, I don't want to hit right now, but it ties into that because I just wanted to stretch it out because you asked, is what are the strategies that we could all get inspired to do that could close that gap between, and maybe a different way than what we said already, but in this way of partnering up with wanting to get people to believe something, right? To believe in something, maybe take that route, as opposed to what I've said before, which is like malaligned intentions. It's not going to lead to longevity, etc. Maybe we partner up with these things like trying to build trust, trying to build confidence, trying to build interpersonal relationships, because it'll get them to the point of their clients believing in the way, believing in a way, what is best for them. And as we know, when they believe in it, it's self-efficacy, like exemplified, and they're on their way. So, I'm surprised that I left that short, but there's lots in there.
No, I think that's an excellent point, and that maybe highlighted something about the way I put it that could be amended. So when I listed trust, confidence, and interpersonal relationships, that's maybe one could say that's the ideal way one would perhaps have conversation with someone or develop beliefs. But to that same point about beliefs being highly tied to the social realm and interpersonal interaction, there's the other direction that can go, which is a white lady wearing Gymshark and saying glutes and biceps. That's the what I mean, which there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Instagram accounts that are doing that exact same thing. So it's just meant to highlight like the extent to which beliefs are so deeply shaped for both good and bad ways by what people see in other people, not necessarily by rational argumentation or knowledge or evidence or things like that.
Yeah, I can see that coming to play in there of just getting stuck in a little bubble and everyone just talking about the same thing and building trust, confidence, and relationships. Yeah, I not to not to pigeonhole that one, but that was my religious upbringing. That I saw that for many early years of my life, and then was very fortunate as a young teenager to start to get outside that little environment and to break all the confirmation biases, right, as to what is truth and what's reality. So that was a good awakening for me at a young age for that particular one.
Yeah, and I personally had a similar type experience in a different religious realm, and I think this is what can sometimes happen in sometimes there can be good elements to the tribal or the communal aspect, and sometimes it can kind of become an echo chamber.
Yes.
And going back to our conversation about ages and when one develops reason, philosophers talk about the age of reason, where you can again become responsible for your beliefs in the sense that you can now bounce back and reflect upon what is given to you and say, I'm not so sure. I like you, mom and dad. You're cool. Thank you for everything you did, but I'm not sure I agree with this. That thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's a wonderful part of life, really, isn't it? Just think about that. The opportunity for a little human or medium human, to actually have the capabilities in our skull for those things to arise as thoughts, because you're cracking, you're cracking. It's like you're breaking through the Truman Show in a very extensive, crazy way of looking at it. But you're like, the show is going on, and you're like, okay, like in his finishing scene, right? I think he basically just went on with the show, where he said something that was like, see you next. I forget what it was, but it's I just find that fascinating that we have the capabilities of doing that.
And that's so, I mean, I know a lot of people view that as like threatening. And maybe if I ever encounter that experience myself, I'm sure first person, having someone or a kid question what you believe, can be tough. But like that just part of that seems so cool. I mean, that's how you get progress. That's
Yeah.
how you get like change.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, yeah. So
Yeah, it is good. I'm seeing it with my girls now too, my young girls. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I guess along those same lines, that definitely applies to the fitness realm. That this topic right here might be its own episode, just right here, because it's such an interesting topic. But the idea is we can construct entire worlds out of belief that go beyond objective physical reality. And if people are looking for someone who's written on this, there are multiple people, but John Searle, Mark Taylor. The idea is that there's objective physical reality, which all animals and humans interact with. And then one of the things that's made humans able to do what they do is attach meaning and symbolism to things and then shared agreement on that. So, like, laws don't exist
Mhm.
at any fundamental ontological, like, universal level. Money doesn't exist.
Mhm.
Um, I always have to. I'm sure you've heard these folks before. The fiat currency folks, the fun folks are like, let's go back to the gold standard. Um, that's a fiat currency too. Like we're saying, this thing has value insofar, like, you know what I mean. Paper has no more intrinsic value than gold does. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, and now it's even more the case with symbols. Now it's not even a
Oh,
physical anything.
yeah.
It's just symbols that we all agree to.
Yeah.
So none of this stuff really, even etiquette, well, etiquette's an easy one, right? Etiquette doesn't really exist in any fundamental way aside from what humans agree on about them. So an interesting fitness connection to discuss, many ones here would be, score on the WOD, your in-body score beyond survival and reproduction, correct movement,
Mhm.
points, WOD. So yeah, let's jam on that for a bit. Thoughts
Yeah.
there?
Well, I don't know if I'll go into it in regards to the fitness one. I apologize. We may have to repeat it again if we think it's deep enough that it's requiring us jumping in and going there for a while. But I immediately thought about why iron ore is not as valuable. If we can, say it, that would really be helpful to my neck of the woods. There's a number of people that are barely surviving up in northern Labrador because some people just decide that they want to make these things and it requires a certain amount of iron ore, and based upon production and manufacturing, it would be beautiful actually if all of a sudden I would put that up as iron ore being a little higher value than gold. It would certainly change a whole lot of people that have had big influences in my life for their future at least. Yeah, and I don't even know where to begin in regards to the fitness aspect for it. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think the point that is related to the one we were talking about before in the social realm and interpersonal interaction is that, again, with all these things, there's a good and a bad element, right? So
Yeah.
good element, like, well, I guess some anarchists and others could maybe argue that this is not a good element, but we're able to construct like a system of government and the rule of law and all these other things that make for a functioning society. Like, again, laws don't exist in any like fundamental universal way, but it's able to, through some sort of collective shared rational agreement, help us get on with things. And that can be somewhat useful in fitness too, but it can also go, as we've discussed, the nefarious way. You've created this world around, gosh, we got to find another punching bag, but Fran and Annie and the high intensity WODs and the workouts the most intense, and I've got to mobilize these 18 different ways, and I've got to do a thruster at this weight. I mean, just this world that gets constructed that seems as though it has reality to it. It kind of it pulls you towards it. That's part of what initially draws people to it. But keeping in the back of your mind, like, this is a constructed system of shared beliefs, and sometimes that can be a good thing, but sometimes it can lead to folly and misrepresentation of the truth.
Yeah, I think it's along the same track of the intentions prior conversation, that and previous to maybe 20 minutes ago, I talked about reality versus fantasy. If that's where we're trying to pull from this to be like, well, why do people believe what they do believe inside of fitness? We've kind of discussed it before. But my point, I guess, just on the things you're just mentioning is that it should make sense to people. Like we have to, I think it's probably less important to jam on, what people believe and more around, the mingling of like, well, how did they get to believe that? That's where I think there's like a spark for me anyways. It's like, because when you discuss the basics of that, like how they get to, then it's all like, oh, it just makes sense. It makes sense that you think that thrusters every Thursday in class will help you live longer. It's like, and I'm too exhausted to talk about trying to change people's beliefs on that particular thing, and I've been further and further backing up to be like, how did this come into picture? And and I don't mind using it as a punching bag because I was that person that listened to that doctrine in the 2000s, right? It was like it hit you right at the right spot, right time. Information sharing is going up and this is the way, and all that shit is useless. And you're just like, yeah, so I immediately jumped to belief, right? So I got to ask of myself, like, what set the stage for me to jump into that belief, right? What set the stage? Also, what set the stage for you to stop believing, James, after 5 years? That's the more important question, right? That's the more important question. Not more important, but also one I think is very important. So, I think of Jung, because you mentioned it in terms of myths and basically getting all these things together for a storyline. I use that to kind of come up with what just makes sense as to why people believe what they believe today. If you don't know, that's the system support I use in my brain. It just helps me, knowing there's a place for this animal, sense of how we started with that belief and where that came from. And then like a theological, mythical, story, in terms of belief. And then the machines and that age. And now like this postmodern subjective realism place of modernity, that's how I like order, how people come to believe what they do believe. It's just like, oh, that makes sense. Here's all your experiences. This is what you went through. This is what you don't even know that you have in your brain that leads you to believe something, or this is your, et cetera, et cetera. I like spending time there, for the fitness story, especially because if we're not aware of it, it's very easy, just so we don't feel like we've been discussing it for 30 weeks in a row now, but it should make sense to us that people believe a certain thing in fitness, right? It should make sense to us. It's entertaining. It's you won't be left out. It's research driven. It's I'll stop.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that is the interesting question, but I think it's an interesting question. Like why, I mean, we can even go to let's go to the CrossFit case. Like why was that the one that took hold?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because for a long time,
timing.
Yeah, right. So there's a big part of that. I think perhaps for you and
audience.
Yes. But yeah, you had a lot of these entrenched, Globo gyms. You had the entrenched aerobic stuff, and like Greg Glassman certainly isn't a Greek god who was on, on Instagram. You know what I mean? Like, and yet, the birth of the internet, people looking for more communal aspects in fitness. I think you're right with timing. I think we go through cycles where we reject what comes in the past, whether it's true or not. You know what I mean? Like the bodybuilding and the running stuff, like we've been doing that for so long. Let's get rid of it. But it's interesting how that came to be so ascendant when it was such a, in a lot of ways, fringe movement without any of the booty stuff, or you know what I mean? Like it eventually came to have that, but it didn't initially.
Yeah, I'd argue that it wasn't, something missing community wise, right? But your commentary is an example of also what my beliefs were at the time, right? When you're injected with a language and it's repeated over and over the same way, you start believing in something, right? Without you thinking about what you're saying. Why are we doing this? It's community driven. Where did that come from? Do you know where that came from? Doctrine. But why? Because they wanted to, and this is like Robbie, this is what happens today, especially politically, right? If you want people to believe in something, what do? Right? You split ideology, right? You gotta go non-conventional, something that's like, that's what you gotta do. You gotta be bipolar in that approach, right? You gotta have an identity on what you believe, right? And so if we're just doing what seemingly at the time to some people were like, we're just doing this useless fucking machine work and aerobic stuff on treadmills, right? And you propose that as the starting point to your message, and then you go, but there's this, it's like, it should be pretty obvious why that will be hook, line, and sinker, right? It should be obvious, right? Because of the language that's used inside of it, with repetition and cult-like perspectives, that you don't even know what you believe anymore. It's just like, well, what do you believe? Well, I believe in da 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 da, and it's written from the journal, right? It's like everyone repeats the same way, right? What's the answer to progression? Just scale and just add more load and just it's like, but that's not right. but that's the answer, right? So you believe then that progression in fitness is not individualized. Oh, no, I didn't say that. It's these like, you can't get a centering on it. So I think it was like perfect timing, to answer your question, in my opinion. Perfect timing. It was a determined method and strategic approach at the right people. It was with the intentions of hitting a certain audience, right? And how do you hit that certain audience? You have unconventional thoughts, right? You say, they're over there and we got to fight the system, right? Yeah, they're impeding on all of our future possibilities in fitness progression, right? I laugh because, dude, I was ready to burn books, burn ANSCA manuals, so when you get in it, it's almost like I'm coming out of a cult. I need to talk about it on the other side of like how you can fall prey to that belief. And sorry for taking up so much energy and time on that particular thing around it, but it was personal to me because I could speak on both sides of it, how you fall into this one belief way. And I just only had at the time, I won't lie, like just little aspects of this open-mindedness. I did. It was little, but once I started like just asking some questions and observing what was going on, the truth comes out.
Yeah, and I think part of the way, I mean, you were talking earlier about like what you feel like it grabbed in you, and I think, I mean, I could be wrong, but I suspect for both you and me and probably for others, part of what got grabbed that was a semi-virtuous thing potentially, like questioning assumptions, like that is something they did, like the idea that I forget the name of the guy on Outsider magazine or whoever it was, the guy who the guy who they were saying like fittest man on earth, and then they were saying, okay, so they were saying, well, is this really the fittest guy on earth? Well, what about this and this? Like that did initially get me, like the philosophical kind of assumption questioning. Wow, there's a whole lot more to think about besides this. But then you're right, it tended to calcify and be dogmatic, and then this is the only way, and you don't need volume for endurance. What's that all about? just interval work. But yeah, it's interesting that progression there. But I think they caught people who both wanted to question things, who kind of like the Matrix wanted to see the evil machines versus the rebels, and then were proselytizers about it too. were people who, once they drank the Kool-Aid would spread the word.
Oh my gosh. That's what I'm saying. Like, you go for the right audience, you go for an audience that is at the right time. You speak the right language, you say the right things. You can get a steamrolled approach, and my personal belief, it was all intentionally aligned that way. I think it's just like perfect timing and precise, precise in the language, and then just ended up just being pile on top of pile on top of pile on of a whole bunch of untruths, and what happens to a system when you pile on a whole bunch of untruths, over time, you get a lot of adversity, and you get a lot of problems in the system, and the system can't last for decades. Just like any human that starts lying, it comes back. You got to pile it on, and you got to create multiple things to allow all those things to work. You know what I mean? And then after 6 years, you're just exhausted and burnt. Same thing in all systems. It just happens that way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One thing that made me think of that I hadn't previously thought of, that I was having a discussion with someone about the other day, is sometimes in like functional health realms, when you're talking about the speed at which things can change, genetics takes a very long time. Like the pure genetic code, like the straight up genetic code, takes a long time to change.
Yeah.
Epigenetics, much shorter time frame. Microbiome, much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Bacteria can exchange DNA. And then perhaps the fastest, belief.
Yes.
And that can be good and bad, right? So we can actually get progress in humanity irrespective of changes in genetic code, irrespective of changes in epigenetics, irrespective of changes in the microbiome, super quickly, but that can go in good directions and bad directions that we're talking about.
Yeah, man, that's the exciting stuff to discuss on, what can we do that safely allows people to just open their eyes to a new perspective, knowing what we just said. So just let's propose that that's true, that beliefs can be changed in an instant. And of course that requires context and lots of conversation, but then that's what we all need to do as fitness coaches, is to provide this space and opportunity to have conversations to say, let's reframe what you believe to be reality, and let's see if it changes your perception a tiny bit. And like you and I know, indirectly, maybe you don't even know, but we have said something to someone that has immediately changed their belief. Immediately, right? Now, we need to go, now, how is that possible? And I don't think we do that enough, right? Because we're like, oh, no big deal. I just changed their belief in it. It's like, think about what you just did, right? You somehow heard that information come in this way and was like, I need you to ask this question of yourself, right? Have you thought about it this way? And you can just see their whole life just changing as you change the question, right? So you're changing their perceptions within seconds, just because you reframed things. So that's the job as a coach, right? That's what we should get excited about. That's the chocolate milk in this conversation, Robbie. Is like, that's the good stuff, is the, forget about even the concept of changing and forget about, malaligned intentions, forget about the market. Is like, what can each of us do in those instances to, reframe something? And man, take multiple hits at it. I just listened to Sam Harris talk about one of his former mentors, who he said was a metaphorical maestro, but his former mentor used to provide so many, like 5 different metaphors that you got it so good on the topic he was discussing because of those 5 metaphors. It like stuck in you, So that's what we need to do as coaches, is like try to come up with our abilities to go at it in different ways to reframe the problem, to change perception, to possibly change a belief in something.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And I think it brings up an important point, which is we've got to figure out how to frame it and how to have the discussion with people specifically about it's very hard. It's very easy to change beliefs when it is something you want to believe, right?
Yeah.
This is the whole
Yes.
Instagram thing. And so like, that's easy. That's not a hard problem. Like you can do that easily with marketing and, certain outfits and driving cars and all the rest of that stuff. The tricky part, going back to your point about we've helped someone realize it's something that they don't want to believe, or realize that they should be changing something that they believe, is how do you get someone to believe something that goes against what they want to believe? Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of what we are discussing in this arena is stuff that you wouldn't initially want to believe. You'd want to believe something different.
Yeah.
So how do we frame it in such a way that it's not like, you believe something stupid, go change that, but different metaphors or different ways of talking about it that shift that perspective.
Yeah. Well, you handhold them through part 2 of the reframing. So reframe the problem, and you get this little sense that they're now questioning the belief, right? And then now you say, are you open to the possibility that what you believe could change? So you got to ask that question, and you can ask it, Robbie, in multiple different ways. The way I just framed it, you don't need to say it that way, but we have to get to that. I would call that part 2, after you like open up you're like, woohoo, there's 5 options here, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't know those options. And then you're like, what do you think about, and you got to lend a hand. That's what I mean. You got to lend a hand and hold hands here, not hold hands, metaphorically hold hands, but or I am saying metaphorically hold hands, because I mean, gosh, you don't want to hold hands today, right? Let's see what your thoughts are on having the conversation around 3 times a week, 50 weeks a year for 60 years being a really awesome, like, audacious goal for fitness. I just try to bring in some real life example of that, right? As opposed to like, listen, I'm just here for 16 weeks prior to the wedding. Right. Yeah. And maybe the topic you're talking about is, their intentions of fitness and why they're doing anything. And is this, by you losing 10 pounds prior to wearing a dress, is that really beneficial for what you know to be true in terms of like how fitness fits in for your health, et cetera.
Right. And how many aspects of those conversations, are in our control, like the time in a person's life, their age, just dispositionally the way the person is.
Yes.
I mean, I was saying to Brandon the other day, there's something about this community where like, coaches may not be necessary in the future, or like, we don't really need warm-ups. We're excited to hear it, but it's also like, shit, that's kind of a dagger, like it kind of hurts. But there's a certain type of person or personality that like wants to know that stuff, is, you know what I mean? Like gets excited by that stuff. And then there's certain folks that are like, no. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's up to us to do our work. That's when you put the coach shirt on, like, you gotta, that's a burden, let's call it what it is. It's a burden that you're just going to have to do the work, and do more work and become more knowledgeable on it, and continue to ask really hard questions. And I think if you go through that practice of the reframing and then offering different solutions for people, when you do that multiple times, you're going to build this really good language and ammunition, so that won't be as problematic or challenging to you over time, Robbie, or any coach, when they get to those challenging pieces, right? Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot in there.
And that gets back to a point we've made before with respect to like dogmatism and skepticism and the idea of neuroses, is that it isn't sufficient, generally speaking, aside from maybe a few things. Like you teach someone how to change the tire, you don't need to show them how to change the tire again. You teach a kid not to put its hand on the flame, it's not going to put its hand on the flame again, generally speaking. There's a whole slew of those things like that. But then there's a whole slew of things which are not like that. And a lot of our fundamental beliefs fall in that category, where it takes repeated,
Yes.
examples. It takes repeated metaphors. It takes repeated conversations. It's not just enough to slide the thing across the table and say,
Yeah.
hey, you're wrong. So
Yes. Yeah. I want to partner that up right now at this point in time with the experience problem that I'm dealing with. How much experience does it take? Just assuming that there's a lot of good experiences for people to become wise and for them to be exemplars for saying something or sharing information that people can believe in. Or I'm just trying to take I'm asking a question here, Robbie. Your thoughts on that is, and I put it into just age areas, right? Like I talked about it earlier about the Santa Claus example, or 25 and 25 to 30, and let's call it, if you're thinking material, in the physical realm, prefrontal cortex maximizing. Okay, 25 to 30 years of age, let's just say. And if that's the base support that we know, and it's basically, there's lots of evidence to show that is the case, there's the base support for those beliefs and perceptions and thoughts, emotions, and how that leads into actions, then doesn't that person at 25 need to have like a ridiculous number of experience after they build up that repertoire to get to the point where they can say something like, I believe, I believe in that, or I think you should believe in this, or this is what my beliefs are. You know what I'm saying? And try to, if you can, anything that comes in your mind for trying to connect that to fitness, that would be helpful. Which is a similar problem, as I mentioned before, we're always dealing with, right? Like that indirect, idea that you've really got to be like 40 plus to have enough like life experience to actually have the emotional, technical components to help people. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
just
yeah.
thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing that's interesting is, we always take the historical perspective. It's going to change throughout history, right? So in the sense of, I don't know the exact age, but in medieval times, I would assume, your apprenticeship begins like 13, 14, and then like 25, 30, man, you are, maybe not and you only have a certain lifespan. Maybe at 25, 30, that's the equivalent of what we're calling 40 now, and it changes, but just based on the nature of like, when we become adults and adopt professions and become apprentices these days, so to speak. Yeah, I mean, there really seems like there's good evidence to suggest that somewhere around 40 or something like that is, we would need to distinguish between a necessary condition versus a sufficient condition.
Yes.
Right. So we could say like, how much is necessary?
Yeah.
So you might say, well, 20 years in it is necessary, but just because you're in it for 20 years doesn't mean it's enough, or that you're the right person.
Yeah.
So that's a good question there. And then I think I had a discussion the other day. Someone was asking like, how did it ever come about that, the presidency has a minimum age requirement of 35?
Mm-hmm.
Just like out of thin air. There's a reason. There's a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think your previous question, I did indirectly have an answer to it. I don't know if I can language it, but it would be within the conversation what we're defining as success in the relationship. So, sufficient would be that which would allow the person under what we call, reaching physical sovereignty or autonomy over time. So, whatever sufficient would be whatever got that person to work with any individual that came in front of them and to quickly get them up to speed on being autonomous. So that's how I would define, what would be sufficient versus not enough, if that's somewhat helpful. Just in my thoughts on what that would be for sufficient enough to be able to have that base support of saying, this is what we should believe, this is what I believe. And then everyone is looking to that person like, okay, I'm just like going for it, I'm going for it. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions. I have true belief, and I believe it's the way. And damn it, we'll figure it. And if at the end of the days, it wasn't worthwhile, then hey, joke's on me. But I think based on what they're saying and how they say it, I believe in that. That's the where the thing where I think belief ties into this that I thought was fairly interesting was our conversation on max physical potential, and how do we ever get to the point, Robbie, that people will believe that they have these things inside of them that they're capable of expressing, and let's just put it into two buckets of patterns for resistance and sustainable activity, and they can do that like day on day off for the rest of their life under what we would call, like, we get more strict with it, like absolute strength and pacing and learning gears, etc. Right? How do we ever get to a majority audience believing in that's the way? How do you create belief in that when we have very few people participating in that? We have a lot of information shared that would say that's not as exciting. So in 2020, what's your thoughts on moving people to a belief in, let's call it, I want to call it something really snazzy, like the OPEX way?
I think you laid out a blueprint earlier. You got to create an enemy, kind of an enemy. You got to have a journal, a dogmatic set of beliefs. You got to cast out anyone who doesn't believe those things, and then get a Reebok sponsorship, and you've got yourself a
touche. Touche.
No, I mean, no, it's a good question. I mean, part of me always wonders, like, I think one thing I've always liked from, I mean, there are many things I like from Rob Wolf, but one of the things he's always said that I've identified with is, I'm not here to convince people who don't want to be convinced. Like, there's always going to be some folks who just, you know what I mean? There's nothing you can do. But I think your question really bears on, like, how do we get to the people who either don't know and are open to it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think in some ways it's going to mirror the method itself. It's going to be gradual, sustainable progress. Over time. And I mean, the movement has grown. I mean, it is growing, and it's always going to, just like with philosophy, it's always going to have to contend with sophistry. It's always going to have to contend with, the cool new thing, but it's making progress.
Yep.
But it's not going to happen in the next year or 2 years, I don't think.
I don't like your answer, but I'll take it. And not to spend more time on that one, but that's given me at least some things to think about, or just me voicing the question is certainly helpful. Just from through my lens, what do I wake up looking to do, and what do we want to do with OPEX? And I just thought I'd sneak in that, is there a way of, indirectly, which I'm falling prey to the fast track concept myself by even asking that question. But is there a quicker way of getting there? Meaning, because this is, I know the hard way leads to wisdom and etc. But it'd be really easy if people just came in believing in the OPEX way.
And they might. I mean, it might become more and more prominent as time goes on. And as we were talking about it, I was just thinking of something that I put in here that I think is relevant, which is, we were talking about the rapidity with which beliefs can spread throughout a culture and a society. But on the flip side of that, it's that much harder to change beliefs of, like, the fitness collective. So it's just, this stuff it's recalcitrant.
Yeah.
Right now we're dealing with the tail end of the Orange Theory and boot camp and CrossFit world, and that was 20 years, and that in some ways does provide hope. I mean, literally 20 or so years ago, that was a blip, that was the fringe, that was nothing.
Yeah.
And then it changed. So there's hope. I'm not sure how quickly it'll happen, but there's hope. Or Inception for everyone. Let's go do Inception.
Yes. Yes.
And we'll put a little Air Runner and a little J-Fitz Rock 3000 in that little safe at the end, and they'll wake up and they'll be like, sustainable activity and lifting a rock.
2 hours steady state running. That's what'll get you there. That's what I believe. Out. Oh, good times.
We have to travel 4 dream levels down and almost die, and to get people to believe it.
Yeah, if you make it. Yeah, if you make it, then you deserve to continue.
So one other belief question I wanted to ask you, I know you and I mean, I could be wrong, but I think both of us dispositionally are more on the fence of like, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Beliefs, ideally you should have some evidence behind it. But I was wondering the extent to which you think, obviously there can be bad fitness examples in general, bad examples of like belief going beyond the evidence that can lead to delusion and things like that. But part of me wonders, can there be a positive aspect to this where, your belief in the fitness future in the face of kind of the way the fitness realm is today, or what we want for ourselves or for our clients? Is there a way in which belief can go beyond knowledge or evidence to be a motivating source of like hope for the future and, not necessarily be nefarious or delusional in the way in which, does that make sense? Does that question?
I think so. And I think I'm going to probably answer it the same way as just our previous thread here. So, that I think it's, I guess it comes from your individual constitution on, just how you're seeing things. So for me, I think I'm probably not the person to provide pats on the back and hope and like, the positive language around, what's to come and where we can point our arrows. I think my time here is probably more well suited as the skeptic and the person to challenge thought. So I probably can't even answer your question because it just doesn't feel right for me to say that there is a possible space there or there's not, because it doesn't even feel like it's my place to do that. I think that maybe through, but as I'm ready to say it, I don't even believe in that. I think maybe through experience over time, like the iterations of this entire fitness experience, it may lead to some evidence of like what people should do. But I'm really, really skeptical of that, based upon just how things have looked for 20 years. And if I'm defining impact as like, 95% of all 8 billion humans, well, 10 billion in a while, 95% of 10 billion humans, when they come out of the womb and they go into this environment, they're like, wow, physical expression is just important as breakfast as a part of my lifestyle. And so, that's what I think about is like how to get there and how to get there while I'm here in reality. That's what I think about. So I'm like, well, what are the pieces and what are my place? What have I been selected to be here to do? And my feeling is it's like to challenge notion and belief and to make people be critical thinkers, and maybe not provide solutions of hope and not be the person who provides those things. So that's that's just where I thought about as soon as you asked the question. So.
No, and I mean that actually that gets to what I was asking, but it reframes it in a different way. So like, I guess to reframe the question in terms of what you just said, why is it that you do what you do, or I do what I do, or Brandon does what he does in the face of like the markets, in the face of like overwhelming evidence to the contrary of like Mirror and Peloton and all, do you know what I mean? Like what clearly belief is driving some of that.
Yeah.
And it's going beyond the evidence, and it's motivating us. So there's a certain power and element there that like isn't, well, maybe it's delusion.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's driving in this critical thinking and skeptical. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah, I believe people should. I'm just using words that I've heard, but people should live an examined life. I believe that people should search for meaning in life. And to my, what my actions are, what I do every day, I get meaning out of that. Like I feel like I'm improving as a human by doing those things. I'm challenging my cognitive capabilities. I'm challenging myself physically. And I'm inside of fitness, and that's what I do. And why do I do that? It's because I believe that I'm finding meaning through those practices. Yeah, that's what and I'm, as I'm aging, I'm standing firmer on ground when I make those statements, right? Like I really do get meaning out of wearing this sweater and doing this. Like, I do. I go home and I feel like, wow, I'm really fortunate to be able to do those things, And so I believe people should have the opportunity or do that. Now, humorously, almost feels like a Monty Python episode we can turn that into, is what else are you doing? Like there's so much there's so many things we can be diverted away from today. And it's really not a lot of it. And if you don't just look around, look at the news and look at what's going on today, you could see like there's a lot of restless minds. There's not a lot of really meaningful things to do. And I'm just saying on the back end of what I believe is important. I think like challenging the notion of making people think about what they're capable of expressing physically for their lifetime and how that leads to great thoughts and a really great experienced life. I think that's kind of important, my belief. So that's my belief,
Agreed. And I think the power behind that is, how meaningful it is to you, how motivating it is, how it's led to the development of a movement. And one other thing I had written in here that I think is relevant is take any famous virtue or idea that we value right now: autonomy, virtue, liberty, truth, democracy. It all started with a shit ton of stuff going against that, like a shit ton of stuff, like just piling on where, you basically couldn't even breathe to get the idea out. And then through that little, spark, it eventually got a few more people, and then a few other people, and then a few other people. Now there's lots of other things in the dustbin of history that didn't quite make it. But I guess what I was trying to highlight with that question, that I think you highlighted very well with your answer, is that, through belief, you can share these things and change perspectives and help shift the culture. Because again, for every single valuable thing that we consider worthwhile today, any ideal today, it started as a little kernel that, society was not that way. So that society did not encourage autonomy. It did not encourage the search for truth. It did not encourage justice. It did not encourage democracy or liberty. So I think it can change, and I think belief can be a powerful agent of change. And I think, the answer you gave kind of highlighted that.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. Yeah, then I agree. I think it can be if we frame it that way, for sure. And I appreciate you doing a switcheroo on me on that, because you reframed it in a way that made me understand it better. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. What do you think there for today? You want to?
Let me see here. I think I have another question for you. Yeah, is there any room for having the discussion on understanding, like maybe it's going back to what I said of just trying to make sense of things, like why people think the way they do and believe what they do. But I had down here, are there any like I guess current to today, like are there things that are going on in 2020 culturally that would make sense of why people believe what they believe in fitness? Like
Um,
how information is shared and how people like live a life today, current education during COVID times, like anyways, I just didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, on the current like 2020 experience, right? Like what this living is like right now. And I don't know if there's any interesting parallels of how, in a way I think about it, Robbie, was like, how do you get someone to a level of belief in what fitness can do for them in 1985 versus how you can get someone to a level of belief what fitness can do for them in 2020, and what are the differences, which are there and real culturally that could, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, the easy answer, of course, is the internet is specific, very
Yeah,
specific.
yeah, for sure.
Instagram, though, like
Yes,
especially in the past 10 years, the visual pictures about what bodies should look like and videos about
yes,
movements. I mean, it's deeply intertwined. I mean, I think if you think back to 1980 to 2000 and uh, TV shows about people running, or Bodybuilder magazine and Runner magazine, like the
yes,
mediums of communication, I think are deeply intertwined with what people believe about what is healthy and what is not. And today, so much of that is the internet, the digital
yeah,
delivery of all these different things, and that's
mhm,
having a huge impact on what people believe. I think both of us would agree, mostly for the negative,
yeah,
but could potentially go in the other direction. But I think that's
yeah,
probably in Instagram in particular. In
yeah,
the past 10 years, that one.
yeah, yeah. I would think that it more so will go in the negative direction for two reasons. Number one, data is showing that with select audiences that can't get out of that. And number two, it's just such a like there used to be like 3 running magazines in 1988. But I'm saying there's like 12,000 iterations of that vision of that runner today.
Yeah.
It's like so many options, it almost confuses. So I think in your point, I guess that's, if that's what you're mentioning, I agree with you that because it's so much, it may actually bring people to the margins to figure out like what is normal, like what is what is the way, because there's so many options. They're just like, you know, yeah,
I mean, in particular, the influencer. I mean, there might have been proto versions, in the past with like a Schwarzenegger or something like that, but like the influencer as such did not exist until roughly 8 to 10 years ago. And now, like, if you use the fitness hashtag,
yeah,
I mean, it's 44 million or something insane. And
wow,
a lot of it is just people who wear Gymshark
yeah,
or whatever, and they're doing
yeah,
basic
yeah,
stuff. And they don't know anything about fitness, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
a huge.
yeah. And I think I'm just asking the question because it's one that I continue to struggle with, on how to, in my near vicinity, right? My wife and my children, and our communication as to what fitness means to them, and then to my staff and people who are close to me, what fitness means to them, and then to our CCP coaches, right? And what fitness means to them. And I'm always trying to stay, current in terms of like, well, how is everyone out there outside of that group, how do they see fitness? Because we don't see what they see. If we don't understand, uh, how they're seeing things, and I think you answered the question. It's the internet being one of the main things. We're never going to be able to really get them to a point of them coming to a belief in fitness, just a belief in fitness, right? As being something really positive. And so that's why I just ask is like, you know, the current social setting in the current environment we're in, and how that may cloud, but also leave a path for people to discuss, you know, what they want to believe in fitness, or how it can help them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that video you did with Carl and Georgia the other day is actually a good example. It's like it's reaching people through Instagram. It's discussing a deep topic of like, should there be a warm up? But it starts with the little like, oh, we're all mobilizing. Look at all the fit. You know what I mean? It starts with that little nugget that kind of like grabs people's attention, that you kind of have to do in this space to like, oh, why am I mobilizing?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I doing the foam roller? But then you can use that as a way to like say, well, let's get to this deeper conversation. Because if you hit them with the deep conversation to begin with, they're gonna be like, scroll, scroll, scroll.
Yeah.
But if you hit them with that little,
yeah, I don't organize that. That's not my.
I know, but I guess it's
hard enough to put that together.
It's an example of something of like, how do you get people to these conversations around truth through these mediums that like aren't going away?
Yes.
And how people are getting fitness information. How do you get that discussion going? So
we talked about the age thing, or we, you know, hit on that a little bit, and I think that's probably up for your good points on, you know, what's sufficient and what's not enough, et cetera, for that age category. And I added to that in terms of defining what's your definition of success. We always come back to the autonomy thing at large numbers of people for it. So I just want to make mention of that again, of this experience that for a fitness coach, we still have to keep honoring that has to be in place in order for you to get to a point for you to even believe in something, believe in a way, or believe in something that you can start speaking about, and then get a big following of individuals who want to do that for themselves also. You know, I think it just takes a lot of experience. And so I'm just mentioning it, that we discussed it, but just as almost like a recap of things to believe. And I want to just make mention again, I find that extremely interesting is the things that get people from a base support, you know, what gets them to a point to allow them to believe what they believe. I find that extremely interesting. There's so much inside of there that I think maybe I will leave this conversation with, and I appreciate that. I'll leave this conversation with, because I think going there may help us become more empathetic, and also allow us to make more sense of why people think the way they do about fitness and where it fits in for them. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I think there's a whole set of descriptive facts from either psychology or anthropology or biology of just how we believe and why we believe what we believe. And then, you know, practically, like, what do we do about it to change people's beliefs? Like we may want to, you know, I think for both of us, the pull is like, well, hit it with the truth. But like, sometimes you need the, you know, the little Hershey's kiss at the beginning. And like, what are the different mechanisms by which you can actually change? If your goal is to actually change belief, what are the mechanisms by which you actually need to do that in a human, for better or for worse?
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Bruce Lipton wrote a book a long time ago, Biology of Belief. That's an interesting one. Dr. I think it's Anthony Damasio. I believe I could be bastardizing his name. I have only read articles or students of his that have done lots of research in neuroscience and cognitive stuff areas. I think that would be a person to go to as well for what you just mentioned of like the structuring and how that comes to be. And of course, Sapolsky, Robert Sapolsky is just so deep inside of the language that you could read on his contributions to that and where that fits in. Yeah, super.
Go to at some point.
Yep. That was great. I wrote down a note there too for how the individualizing of things is really important in this, in what we do, right? What OPEX does, and where that it always helps us become a little bit more hopeful in that if we focus on the individual and we meet them where they're at and have the right conversations and know how to move up and down and have tools that allow us to change people's perceptions and reframe things, what is all that? That's individualizing it. That's making it work for them, And so I think then you may not struggle as much with whatever you come into with beliefs, because you are honoring the aspect of what you believe in principle, because you're treating the person as an individual. Yeah. And I think if you have that, like all the principles we talk about in mind of the coach attributes, and assuming that person has some good in them, and this is a good relationship, and these are the expectations, then I think it can lead to some really positive thing. But damn it, we need more soldiers. We need more people, right? We need more on the front line who want to do that with people and get inspired. To what I said earlier, it's hard work. It's hard work. It's not going to be easy. It's tough, and you may only change 50 to 75 people in a lifetime, but I'm telling you, that is really fucking admirable. We need more people like that. And
I think we're getting there, but it's it's a linear progression.
Yeah. Well, let's keep that train rolling, because I'm getting older, and we need to keep it rocking. We need to keep it moving. I want to, yeah.
Call up Reebok.
What's that?
Call up Reebok. Get the sponsorship, and we'll get a lot more.
I love it. The fast track phone calls always there. Hey, I got a problem.
We're gonna have the OPEX way on all the Reebok shoes, and that'll.
Yeah. There we go. I like it. The OPEX way. Well, thank you for this today.
Thank you.
That was really helpful. I think there's more to be in that, and the topic, of course, being named, that lends itself to that. And it, for me, anyways, it sure fulfilled that. There's a lot in there, so that was really helpful.
Yeah, agreed. I always enjoy discussing these things with you.
Yeah, super. Okay, till the next time, to give people a little taste, we're on to some new and exciting things next time. Let's not tell them, but we got some exciting things coming up. Trying to keep you in tune and liking us and subscribing.
I think we got a lot of cool new things. Even though this episode will appear at some point in 2020, we're recording it at the end of 2020, so we got some cool new stuff for 2021.
Yeah, awesome. Good. I'll look forward to it. Thanks again, Robbie.
No problem.